Okay, let's continue on with our understanding and learning about how Sonokinetic system works and how it pertains directly in Indie, how this works. So we know that you can play it live and you can play it with MIDI notes in your DAW. So when you're playing it live, and I'll attempt some of that here, you just, with your left hand, of course, you control your chords. And with your right hand, you pick some of the phrases you want to play. And you change chords as you hear the music change and shift. And you try to do that in a musical way. And sometimes you hit it right and sometimes you don't. But if you practice a few times, you can get the transitions really good. And then you can bring in other instruments. And before you know it, you're getting a really nice performance played live. And even though that was just 3 different phrases and 4 chords, I could have played that for another maybe 10, 20 bars and had them intertwine and interweave with different timings, playing different parts of that 4-bar performances. So you could easily end up with 30 bars of music just from 3 phrases being uniquely played in different ways. So that's a really powerful system, and that has to do with the PhraseLink that I'm going to talk about towards the end of this video. But before we get into phrase linking, we need to understand a few things before that so that we get a better understanding of the rest of it. So let's start back in our DAW here and look at MIDI notes and how we can use the system of MIDI notes and drawing MIDI in here. So here we have this phrase today. So if we click on it, we can hear the demo of it. Now remember, that's a little misleading because there's a lot more to this performance than that shorter clip. If we do click on it and we go to the score of it, we can see that, you know, there's several bars of music here, and it kind of interweaves, and it's a unique line. And so you can weave in and out of this performance, getting many different looks at this actual performance, and it doesn't just repeat. And so you can use it in a lot deeper way than you imagine. So let's pop back out of that, and we play it with MIDI notes. We know we have our controller lane here from C3 up. We have the 12 notes, which we can choose any performance. We know that, any phrase. These notes down here from C1 to all the way up to the beginning of C3. So in the blue lanes here, we just choose chords. So we're not gonna get into the basics here. You understand that. And these red keys here are the bar sync and the phrase follow and continue button. So we'll talk about that kind of now. Generally, when you write MIDI, you are simply writing notes that pertain to holding down a choice of phrase and how long it plays, and you're just writing in chord change notes. And these chord change notes don't have to be as long as the performance, you know. They can be just a trigger. So you'll get the same thing if it was just a short trigger note saying, yes, I want a C major for this whole 4-bar performance. So if I play it, I get that C major through this whole 4-bar performance. Okay, so we understand that. And again, these could be long notes, you know, you'll get the same thing when I play it again. So it's gonna, these notes down here, it doesn't matter how long they are, they're just indicators of chord changes. So in my next little demo here, you can see we have 3 chord changes, and if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that there's space in between the chord changes, and we get a different type of performance. And it's for a more rhythmic phrase where you have chord changes and space in between. But if we look here, we have a performance where we have 4 chord changes down here, and the performance MIDI is broken up into 4 distinct chunks here, and now this is all played with bar sync and phrase follow on. So we're going to give you some examples of how that works here with this MIDI data. So if I play it with bar sync on, and they're red, these 2 keys are red, which means they're engaged, they're on. Let's play it and see what we get. So what we just heard was the first bar played right through. So we heard the first bar of this phrase played right through, but it was triggered with 4 chord changes, and it was broken up by the distinct chunks of MIDI here. If we wanted to play that right through more smooth, we could get rid of that and just drag that and play it again. So we get a more harmonious changes within the chords. We could also go back and even though all these notes are broken up, the performance notes are broken up, and we'll just give a more distinct example here. If I hold down my sustain pedal while playing it, I will still get the same effect if though they were played all together really smooth. With my sustain pedal down now. So your sustain pedal can make the chord changes more harmonious and smooth, or you can drag this note to make it more smooth, or you can write in sustain controller data down here, which would also act like your sustain pedal being on. So there are ways to write the MIDI, get your performances, your phrases played harmoniously, changing chords, or having them broken up. And if I wanted to have them played broken up style, I would just go back to having it played like that. And if I wanted it really to be played rhythmically, well, first let's hear this. So you're actually hearing some of the release notes in between there, as in between these chunks of the performance key. And if I wanted it to be played even more rhythmic, just re-triggering right from the start every time, I would turn these keys off, so now there's not follow and it's not synced to the place in the bar. It will simply re-trigger bar 1, beat 1, bar 1, beat 1, bar 1, beat 1, bar 1, beat 1. Every time it hits this note, this phrase will start right from the beginning again. So what you heard there was simply the first part of this phrase always re-triggered with space in between for that release note to be heard, at least part of it. If there was more space in between, you could hear the full release note. So you get a more rhythmic effect with these keys off. I'll play it again, but you do hear the chord change. You're hearing the chord change of the first beat of the first chord every time. So just to be more clear, you're hearing the first part of this phrase with just pitch changes in the chord change here. You're not hearing different parts of the phrase. You're just hearing the pitch changes of the different notes in the chords. So I hope that's pretty clear there, because once you understand this clearly, then you can understand a lot of how this engine works. Now if we turn these keys back on, so it's going to be synced to the bar, the places in the bar, and it's going to follow the phrase right through. We're still going to get a choppy performance, but we'll hear more. It'll play right through more into this whole phrase. You'll hear more of this phrase, and it won't be re-triggered from the start all the time, but it will have the chord changes. So we heard more of the performance. It was still broken up, still chord changes, but it actually played through more of this phrase. And again, if we turn that off and drag this, we'll have even a more nicer performance, smoother performance, because phrase follow and bar sync, you will hear a really more smooth part of playing through a lot of this phrase. All right, so I hope that's a little more clear on how bar phrase and phrase repeat or follow works. And in this next little segment, or I should say one other thing about this, just if you want to understand it just really simply without getting too confused or anything, simply the simplest way to look at it is when they're off, these keys are off, it's always going to re-trigger right from the beginning. So every time there's your performance key, and I'll go back to where it was. So every time MIDI note is triggered here, and there's 4 of them, it's simply going to re-trigger right from the beginning. So it's going to re-trigger from the beginning, re-trigger, re-trigger, re-trigger. When these are on, it will re-trigger, but it'll re-trigger bar beat 1, beat 2 will be triggered to the phrase, beat 3 will be triggered here, beat 4 will be triggered here. So it's still going to be staggered, but you'll be hearing different beats of this performance throughout the bar. Hence it's called bar sync, the switch here, bar sync. It's syncing to the beats of the performance in the bar. When it's off, it just triggers right from the beginning every time. So just wanted to mention that a little extra, because having that understanding gives you a better understanding of what we're going to talk about next, about when full phrases are syncing in and out. And that's the real power of this system is coming up. So I just wanted you to understand the basics first before we get into full phrase linking and syncing. All right. Now this next part here, and we'll turn these back on, because generally I have phrase follow and phrase bar sync and phrase follow turned on generally. If I want some rhythmic effects, choppy rhythmic effects, I will break my release samples and turn that down. I will turn these off, and I can, make MIDI that's choppy for phrases that are more rhythmic. All right. So let's go back to where we were. All right, and we have this phrase. Now in this case, if you want, there are 3 ways that you can have smooth transitions when you're making chord changes in your music. When you play live, simply hold your chord shape down and play a phrase. And if you're going to change chord, keep one of the notes held down while you're moving your other to the other shape. And if you want to know how to do it in MIDI, you simply drag over one of your notes into the next chord change, and you do voice leading that way. And that means that this chord will smoothly transition into the next chord simply because you're holding down one note. It doesn't matter which note, just drag over one note in MIDI, or hold one finger if you're playing live on the keyboard. Hold one finger down while you're changing shape to the next chord. Simple as that. You're basically just kind of voice leading into the next chord, either through MIDI here or how you're playing it on your keyboard. The second way to have nice chord transitions is, as I stated earlier, by simply having your performance key, drag it over all your chords, and it will just play all the chords right closely together and lead into the next. Or having your sustain pedal turned on or held down will also give you that smoothness. All right, so just more examples of different ways you're going to hear the MIDI pertaining to these 2 buttons, which parts of the bar is going to be heard and played. We already went over that. This part of the demonstration is, how do you play your phrase, which may have an attack a little later in. So let's zoom out here and go back to yesterday's example of actually rendering out, I believe it was this phrase here, So we rendered out this phrase, and it's simple. You just write MIDI for it, and then just go to your track and edit, render in place, and it will render whatever phrase and chord you have. And so we rendered out an audio, and we could see though the attack time, and we talked about that yesterday. The actual loudest part of the initial part is really almost 1 beat in on this particular phrase, and it varies on whichever performance you're choosing. But it's that attack time that you want right on the beat. If you want to play very precisely, very rhythmic, if you want your beat and your attack right in the same place, if we zoom out, you have to do that also in your MIDI. So let's go back here and let's zoom back in to where we're looking at that. Now, these notes, these chord chunks here, so there's a chord and there's the controller, of what phrase it is and how long it plays. And on the first beat, maybe leave that right on the beat, so your MIDI is right on. It starts right at but on the rest of the notes behind that, there are some times where you may want to bring this MIDI ahead of the beat because you want that attack to be right on beat 23 in this case. And we know the actual attack starts a little bit further into the audio. So you may, in certain instances, want to drag your MIDI a little ahead of the beat, depending on where the attack of your particular phrase may or may not start. So that's one way you can do it. So just be aware that sometimes you may want to move your MIDI a little ahead of the beat, depending on the phrase you're using. Okay, now there's another thing I wanted to mention about audio. Yesterday, as we just shown here, we did a render of this audio. And since I did that, I simply made a copy of it, clicked on it, and sent it to Melodyne. And I've shown how to do that in another video. So we know that Indie has all these phrases. And if we click on a unique phrase, it's played one way. And if you get Indie, you may think to yourself, wow, wouldn't it be great if they had like 5 versions of this particular phrase, just played slightly different. How much more you could get out of this library if you just had another subfolder with 5 versions of each phrase. And that's the first thing I thought when I got Indie, saying, wow, this is really a great system. But of course, people want more ways to, they want more variations, more ways to bring it into your compositions, to make it more unique. Well, one way you can do that, a really powerful way, is understanding how to use Melodyne with Indie. So if you're making a song with Indie, you've chosen a beat per minute, and you've probably chosen a key and a scale you want to work in. And if you have, then you simply choose what phrases you want to use. You may have several phrases you use a lot and wish you had 5 more versions of each of these phrases. So bring them into Melodyne. And there are a couple things you need to know about using very complex phrases inside of Melodyne. These phrases from Indie are complex, and they're very harmonically rich, which means there's lots of harmonic overtones. Now, those are the hardest audio to work in when you're manipulating the audio. But thankfully, Melodyne happens to be, if not the best, one of the best ways. It's probably the best because it understands audio at a much deeper level. So you can manipulate even complex, harmonically rich audio in Melodyne. You just need to know the program well and understand a few things. So when I brought this in, and let's just solo and play this example, then I'm going to talk a little more about it. So the first part is played the normal way. It's just the phrase as we've heard it before. We'll start it at the beginning. So we've heard that before. And the second part, I simply, took some of these notes. I think it was that one, maybe this one down there. I'm not sure about that. This one and this one, I think. And I moved them up one note up in the scale. Because remember, in Melodyne, you can analyze the keys and you can analyze the chords. So it will tell you chord changes and what key you're in, and then the grid system that's all in, then you can simply move it into a musically relevant scale by just dragging and moving them. So that may have been where it was originally. I simply moved it up a musical note within the scale to give it a different performance. Literally like saying to the cello player and the violinist, play this note instead of that note, making it a unique performance. Now let's play it. There. Those notes are totally different performance now. If I go from the beginning, it's totally changed I have a new indie performance phrase, basically, which then you can save these audio files into a folder and just call it whatever the phrase is called, keep track of it. And then whenever you're writing a song in that chord, that you need that chord, you now have maybe 5 new versions of this unique phrase, or whatever phrase you used. I think it was a different one. Now, that's really powerful because now you've taken this phrase-based library that maybe had a couple hundred unique phrases into maybe 1,000 unique phrases. But remember, a lot of these phrases are very harmonically rich. Some are easy to make variations. Some you can just go in here like a bass notes and change them up. But some are very unique, harmonically rich, and you have to know how to use Melodyne. A couple tricks to help you are that if you're going to bring in a very difficult passage, you may want to change the algorithm and bring it in and change how it was initially brought in and change to a different algorithm of how it detects it and redetect it. And that may help you. You may want to change it to a melodic from polyphonic sustain and try polyphonic decay. Try different ways to bring it actually in. Secondary, another thing you can do is if you're going to change the note, if there's a harmonic, like say this note may have a harmonic related to it above it. And if you move this note, make sure you move the harmonic of that note with it. And that will help you to make changes to different notes. Your root note, change the harmonic of that root note with it, and that will make smoother transitions. And you can also use the transition tool to cut notes and to change their transition from one to the next if you're starting to get artifacting. You can use tools in Melodyne to help you to make smoother changes in notes and to give you a nice sounding new phrase. So in the next part of this video, we're going to go into harmonic shifting, and the final part, which I believe is the best part, is that the phrase linking system, which kind of brings it all together. So that'll be right up next. All right, so let's talk about the harmonic shift. Generally, it's not engaged until you turn certain phrases on to be shifted. And let's first look at these 2 blocks of MIDI here to give a small demonstration. The first is played as normal, where I have a control key which tells me I want this phrase turned on and I want these 4 chord changes to take place, and we can play that. And you can see the chord changes in blue. And you can see the chord changes up here. And now the second one will play the exact same thing without any chord changes. You see the blue stays the same, but the actual phrase up here is changing. The chords are still on C, and I get the same performance. So what's going on there? Well, I'm simply, instead of putting the chord changes here, I've shifted to similar chords up here. If I scroll up to C6 area and the green area and play that, you see how it shifts. So these keys now are changing, not the blue chord changes. So you get the same result using two different methods. So what is harmonic shifting, and how does that really work? Well, in the manual it kind of describes it as a way to give you change your chords and get into intervals and things and get different harmonic shifts of chords. So the way it works for us here, looking at it, is simply if you can play chords and phrases normally and get a long way with it, but there may come a time where you want to add some more spice to some of these chord changes. And so normally every phrase here will be always changed, the chord will be changed by the chord. You can't have one phrase playing a different chord and another phrase playing a different chord. They're all controlled by this key range here, by the blue keys. They all will change the chord. But what if I wanted just my violin players to play a different chord, a different harmony away from the rest of these chords? Well, you can do it with the harmonic shift. So you can get more creative, basically. You can say, your violinist, I want them to be shifted. I don't want them playing the same chords. And that brings a lot of harmonic variation to your performances. So let's do another little demo here. I'm going to use, to keep it simple, I'm going to have just two phrases here. So one we've been using and the other one we've been using. And normally they would be both controlled at the same time by the chord changes in the blue. But this time I want to say, okay, these violins I want to be shifted. I want them to be harmonically changed. So I make sure that this button is on, and it is on by default right here. So just keep this plus and minus button turned on, lit up. Okay, so that's ready to go. I want that to receive changes. It's on. This phrase, I don't want to receive different chord changes or harmonic changes. So I turn it off. So by default they may be on, whatever, but just determine what phrases you want on, and I think it's this one. So what phrases you want to change and be harmonically shifted, so turn them on, and simply the ones you don't want to be shifted, turn this button off. That's simple. So now when I play these two on the keyboard, I'm going to shift this phrase on this. I'm going to shift it, and you'll see these green keys changing. I may keep it at the original C, which the bass part of it will be playing, or I may start to change the violins, and you'll see it move on the green keys here. So just watch as I play a little bit. So both keys engaged. So we'll play that for a while, just the normal way of hearing it. All right. Now I got to move my hand a little bit back to the keyboard, or to the mouse. Now I'm just changing the violins harmonically. I can get some decent changes here. So I'm trying to do 3 different things at once. It's a little difficult for this demonstration, but so I can change the harmonies. So the violin phrase is changing chords separately, basically, from the bass here, or this phrase here, which I believe is this one. So in a nutshell, instead of having all your phrases changed by these chords, you're able to pick out certain phrases, make sure this is turned on, and have them changed by either playing it. Well, it's hard to do 3 things at once. That's why you, in most cases, I think you would write the harmonic shifting in MIDI. So now, if as an example, I can play the same thing with the MIDI notes. So that's our first note. And if I add there. So now I'm going to change, maybe this is a better way to look at it actually, because I can do it in MIDI and don't have to try to move both my hands and talk into the mic all at once. So now what's going to happen, simply I'm going to do the same thing, but the MIDI notes are going to shift just the violins, because remember the violins are on for shifting and the bass parts are not. So now MIDI will do this same thing. And you can just change it with your mouse too, but you get the idea. Now this may not be the best musical demonstration of this, but I'm just showing you the functionality. There are cases, and this can be very, very powerful, because when you're composing, you'll have 3 or 4 different phrases going, and you'll be playing them, and they'll be linked, and there'll be times when you want some really interesting variations and maybe a little discord in just a few of your phrases, and maybe in your strings or maybe the woodwinds. You want there to be a little bit of discord in some of those changes, and that's simply you would write, you would activate it on, you turn everything else not to be changed, and you would turn the woodwinds in this example to be activated by the shift. And so your woodwinds would be, you'd have a little discord there, a little bit of, and that would add flavor to your performance. So that's how you use harmonic shifting. You can play it in live with your mouse or change these keys while you're playing, or you can set it up on your MIDI notes up here on C6. So hope that gives you a little understanding of how the harmonic shift is used. I mean, the more you play this system, the Sonokinetic systems, and they all have harmonic shift, you begin to see how powerful that is. Now, every shift, every note may not sound good musically. Even in their manual, they kind of explain to experiment a little bit. It depends on, as they explain it, if some of these phrases, what gender they are, or if they're parallel. Different phrases will be affected by shifting in different ways. And as you learn more about it, you can begin to tell which ones will be shifted better than others. But generally, you can experiment with 12 different variations of ways to shift certain phrases against other phrases. And it's a tremendous musical value to add flavor. So in the final segment, we are going to talk about the phrase linking, where this all comes together, and how the Sonokinetic Indie can play full phrases, linking phrases that are linked with other phrases. And we'll get into that next. Let's take a look at the mysterious phrase link. It's on a key, and I'm in the manual here, and it's on A sharp, but A sharp -1. It's like a hidden key. Press the hidden key switch A sharp -1 to reveal which of the 12 keys in the playable range from C3 to B3 are linked to one another. Now, I never even discovered this until way later. And I thought, but when I was reading in the manual, it says using the powerful phrase link function has some very creative possibilities. So I'm thinking to myself, wow, I got to find out what this is. But most people won't even notice it because literally, if we go back to the DAW here, the key switch for it is not colored. It's not mentioned. You can't click on it and get information on it. It's literally hidden. So I don't know what's up with that, because when I looked into it, I discovered that just like they said in the manual, it's very creative and very powerful. But to understand why it works so well, you have to understand how a phrase is made, and how much actual recorded data they have in these phrases, which you don't may not really access in a playable way without PhraseLink. Because first of all, let's turn it on and activate it, number one. So we know it's A sharp. So if I click on this, you see these keys go from orange to a red color. So let's just go back to the first phrase here and keep everything normal. Now, I have them all turned on now, so they're all pink colored. See how when I click on it, they go from orange to pink? So you have to click that down using your mouse or your keyboard, and then you can turn these pink keys on and off by velocity. So if I go slow velocity, they will all turn off again, right? And it's all the keys, so black and white keys. So I'm just clicking them with a slow velocity. Now they're green, which means all the phrase link keys are off. I had them all turned on. So, and you only see that when you're depressing down A sharp, right? Now you can see what you're doing, and you can manipulate them when C sharp is pressed down. Now I'm going to turn them all back on. I'm activating all with a faster velocity. All right, so now they're back to where we started. They're all activated. I have PhraseLink turned on all 12 of my presets. Okay, so that's how you access them, turn them on and off. Well, what is it doing? It doesn't really explain it that well, other than saying how creative and the possibilities and powerful it is. And but that's why I wanted to explain bar sync and how much depth there is in these actual recordings, how many actual bars of recordings, even though it may just sound like you're getting one repeated bar. It's actually recorded a lot of information with each phrase. Now, what I think happens with phrase linking is, now when I play these phrases and I have them set up on the keyboard, when I change chords, it's like instead of every chord changing starting from the beginning of a phrase. So as an example, I'm going to hold down a phrase here, and you hear these woodwinds, right? And it's on the key of C major, and it's playing through that long 4-bar phrase that has been recorded. So you get a lot of variation there. And every time I press down, it restarts it playing. Now if I play another phrase while this is playing, this phrase starts to play not exactly from the start point, but it plays from where the woodwinds was playing. So now I have two phrases that are linked together with different starting points. They're not starting both at the same time. And you're saying, well, what's the big deal with that? Well, the big deal about that is that every time I re-engage a new phrase now, it's going to enter my playing, my composition at a different place in that maybe 4-bar long unique phrase. Which means then that as I play live, these phrases are all linked in different time positions of their 4-bar recording, and which means you get all these unique variations of these phrases as you play. So let's just do some more. I start there, and now I bring in some brass, and maybe now I do a chord change. And that's beautiful, right? Because they both started at two different places in their recordings. And now I can make another change. And I can add in another phrase that will start at a unique position in his recording. So now I've got 3 phrases playing in a unique way, being changed with different chords, that a unique changing in chords. And that ends up being a very beautiful situation. So, as I stated earlier, I think in the beginning of the video somewhere, that you end up being able to play all these parts of these phrases at different beginning and different points in their recordings while changing chords, so you get unique views of every phrase with unique chords according to your timing of. So when I'm playing, example, these woodwinds, as I listen to it, I may decide, okay, now is a good time for this next phrase to come in. I choose when it sounds best. Then the horns come in. And that may or not be a good decision of timing, but you can just practice over and over and just say, okay, now I want the horns to come in earlier. And you get a different version of those horns because it's picking up at a different place relative to the woodwinds. See how beautiful that is? And so now you imagine you've got all these hundreds of different phrases that are linked. So that's why they call it, I guess, a PhraseLink. They're linked. They don't all start at the same time. They start at different places in their long recording, their long and varied recordings of every phrase. So think about that for a second. You can play unique chords with unique looks and timings of each phrase, and you have hundreds of different phrases and categories to choose from. And as again mentioned earlier, you can use Melodyne to make even hundreds more of these unique phrases that you may not be able to play live, but you could bring them in at the final, once you have this all done and rendered into your DAW, you may render it into audio, and you can just see the waveforms, and you can change different unique phrases that you may have changed in Melodyne at the last stage. So I wanted to show that there is indeed a lot of control with this system. And because I'm getting a little fatigued, this video is going on, it's going to be approaching maybe an hour by the time it gets done. I was going to talk also about the crossfading and offsets, which give you even more musical ideas, because you can crossfade, meaning you can vary the initial attack of each phrase and how it blends into another phrase, either sharply or not so sharp. And when you're using phrase linking, you may want to blend it in softer. So you turn it to a softer crossfade into the next phrase. Or you may offset very rhythmic phrases to get some syncopation and polyrhythms going. So when a person says, I love the sound of Sonokinetic libraries, but there's not enough variation, there's not enough control, maybe after watching this, you have a different look at the possibilities here. Now, as an ending point, I would also want to bring up that, Sonokinetic, they've recorded all their libraries in the same hall, which sounds fantastic. I don't think anybody really challenges how beautiful these phrases sound. The biggest problem is how much control and how, you need to have a lot of control, and you want unique sounds in your compositions. So these are some ways where you can really enhance that. But again, Sonokinetic recorded all their libraries in the same hall, same miking system, I assume same type of instruments and players and articulations. Now, so if that is the case, and they're going to come up with, say, a strings library that uses these instruments, the same hall, the same mics, the same instruments and players that, say, they recorded a phrase library with, it only makes sense that the next step would be that not only do you have all this control with phrase linking, bar sync, X-fade, offsets, and all this, but you would be able to drag the MIDI of such a beautiful recording into your DAW and have it instantly, maybe when you drag it in the next version of this, I'm just speculating, that it won't just drag in the MIDI of that performance, it'll drag in the multi-sampled round-robin version of all the instruments that were involved in making this unique, beautiful phrase. It will drag all that information in also and set you up. If they have their own woodwind library and string library that was created the same way, same hall, same mics, instruments, it makes sense that the next step would be to have even more control. So that you have a great phrase, you can instantly drag in the MIDI, drag in all the instruments that created it, the articulations that created it, and it's going to be using the same mics, the same hall, and even the same instruments, and perhaps even the same players. So to me, that is where the next generation of sample libraries could be going. Very exciting to think that maybe they might be doing that. So I hope you enjoyed these videos. I'm sure I made some mistakes, and I'm sure I forgot certain things in here, but generally I wanted to show you that there is indeed quite a bit of control and a lot of upside to where Sonokinetic is going. Their sound is beautiful. What we're looking for is the control and the uniqueness that we can bring into our own compositions, and I think it's going that way. And so if you enjoy these videos, subscribe, leave comments,